In this video, I'm gonna be going through the footages in my grading reel. If you didn't see it, check the link in the description below. I want to show you how I start grading a log footage, and then I want to also show how I keep improving that till I'm happy with the result. So I'm not gonna be going through all the footages I did, but I hope I can give you a basic idea. Now, to be able to grade a log footage, the first thing you have to know is what a log footage is. Log footage is a professional profile for cameras to capture maximum dynamic range and is used in very professional cameras such as Alexa and Sony f55 and Sony FS7. How I get these log footages is by using Magic Lantern RAW, and you can easily convert raw footage to log. If you have any questions about it, you can just ask me and I will do a video about it. Log footages have two things that are different from a normal clip. Let's go to something that I really can show. This seems to be a good example. Log footages generally have less contrast and less saturation than a normal clip does. So basically, you can grade a log footage just by increasing the saturation a little bit and increasing the contrast. The way I get raw to log means that I'm losing a little bit exposure, so just punching up the exposure, increasing the gain in Speedgrade almost fixes it. So this gives you a clip that actually looks fine to work with. But this is, if you do it this way, you are not maximizing the capabilities you have. So let's start with my grading technique. Now the main thing I always do is to increase the exposure. I'm gonna use this waveform monitor, or you can use this histogram here, to maximize my dynamic range, and I can keep increasing it, but as you can see it starts clipping. So by using my waveform monitor, I'm going to increase them so they are just about to clip, but they're not clipping. Now as you can see, there are no blacks, so I'm going to use my gamma to actually crush these a little bit. So we added the contrast right now. Let's add some saturation. 150 will do fine for now. So by just using one layer in Speedgrade, we actually converted log footage, which looks very flat and unusable, to something that most people will enjoy. But we are not done here. I will keep going in a new layer because I will start doing things differently. And this is how I work. I divide my grade into layers so that I can turn each one on and off to see what effects these layers have. And one thing very important about Speedgrade is, if you want, you can always tone a layer down using this opacity slider. By the way, I'm holding Shift to increase the effect of my mouse. If you don't hold it, it's very sensitive for fine tuning. Now I got the main contrast and saturation there, but I want to play with the highlights. As you can see, it's affecting this area here, but I don't want to be blind about it. I'm using this gray out color gray to actually see the highlights that I have. And using this slider here, again holding Shift, you get to have a bigger control of what is highlights and what is midtones. So I just want very little bit of yellow or orange here, and only these should be highlights. So by turning to normal, I now know what I'm controlling, and I don't want to clip there. I just want to increase it a little bit so it has a contrast with the flowers. Now I go to shadows, and I always do it like this: highlights, shadows, then midtones. Then I go to color gray. Now I see that all of these leaves are actually in shadow. And by using this shadow midtone slider, I'm actually going to change this a little bit. So the red parts of these flowers are going to be more midtone. So I go back. Using shadows, I'm going to use the offset slider a little bit. And this is just practice. You can see what each layer does by moving them a lot. Then you can understand how much you have to move each of these. Now the final part is going to midtones, and again, using color gray, we know what we are affecting, and we can use gain again to brighten these up, and again use the gamma down to increase the contrast in midtones as well. And I'm gonna also try using offset to see what I can get. I'm gonna increase the saturation of midtones as well, because this is the area that I want people to focus on. So without this, with this, as you can see, the highlights are getting a little bit brighter, the shadows a little more darker, and midtones, these flowers and leaves popping a little bit. A subtle effect, but definitely it's an effect that creates a difference. Now, the final part of primary adjustments is color changes. So I go to highlights, and I can actually change the color to the way I want. Again, my recommendation is just go extremes to see what kind of effects you can get. And then go very subtle and choose the color you want. Be careful with highlights, however, because highlights, if they are clipping, should be very close to white. And if you make them look purple, then it will look very fake. So I generally don't tend to change the highlights very much. I only change them if they are not white, or if they have a color cast on them, I will counter the color cast. So we are going to use multiple adjustments, not only gain. And you can see I didn't do much. It's just getting a little bit bluer, and I think this is the tone I want here. Now going to shadows again, and you can see how they look like. Of course you can use color black, but I'm using color gray. And we are going to be changing the leaves a lot. So by changing them to green, you can see that we are making a huge impact on the leaves. Now I want to start with gain, because gain is going to be the least effective, and I can fine tune my adjustments here. Just adding a little bit gamma, and be very careful with shadows and offset. If you change this, it will change it very fast and it will look very fake. I usually don't play with offset very much. Now you can easily see that the leaves are just a little bit yellow, greener, and the wall here is getting a little bit bluer. And finally the midtones. This is the part we get to change the colors of the flowers, at least a little bit. As you can see, I started with gamma. I tend to prefer gamma in midtones. I think it's the most natural looking way of changing midtones. So by playing with this and tinting it towards red a little bit, and as you can see, it's not a massive change, but we change things in here, and here. And everything about color grading is just to be subtle and don't overdo anything. You can always use the key 0 to see the effect you made, and you can see that we changed a lot from the start. A log image that looks very flat is now an image that looks very good. Now, of course, this is just a grading reel. If you have a story behind it, you can of course use these to give them a certain look. If it's a colder scene, you can go for something colder, or If it's a scene, maybe in autumn more, you can warm them up, but for now we are leaving it here because I think it looks very good. Now, one thing that most people don't do, and this is not available in most plugins for Premiere Pro, and this is the main reason I switched to Speedgrade for my gradings. This will allow me to actually change individual colors far precisely. Now, I want these flowers colors changed a little bit, maybe. So I get this eyedropper tool and just drag it over the colors that I want to change. Then I go to color gray, and you can see it does a pretty good job of selecting the flowers. By using denoiser and blur, we feather out selection a little bit. So now, if I increase it or decrease it, we are only affecting the flowers. So I can adjust these to give a certain look to the flowers. Again, I can increase the saturation of these flowers and actually go ahead and completely even change the colors of these flowers. But again, saddle goes a long way, so just play with it in different colors and see what works for you. I really like to do opposite things with gain and gamma to create a contrast. And as you can see, I made this subtle difference because I'm really happy with the way they look, but I'm gonna show you another clip that I really changed a lot of things. So for now, this is good and all. Adding another secondary selection. Again, you can use these, but I really like to use eyedropper tool. Selecting these leaves, color gray. It selects a little bit of the background. If you want, you can use masks, and I might show it to you. But for now, we are not using masks, and just changing the color far easier using these tools. And we can make them look the exact green we had on our mind. For this tutorial, I'm actually going a little bit extreme. And of course, you can always adjust opacity here. Let's go to 80. So before and after. And let me go through each of these changes we made. We first adjust the main colors and saturation and contrast. We then went and changed the contrast and saturation that we want, highlights, shadows, midtones differently. We changed the colors a little bit. Here we made it bluer. The leaves we made a little bit greener, and the midtones we just changed them very subtle. Here we changed the look of the flowers. I thought they were too yellow, so I toned them down a little bit. And here we changed the way leaves look a lot. Again, this is the way of grading I almost always do. Now we have this clip. When I converted it to log from raw, I adjusted things a little bit so it's not as flat as the one before. But the way I go through these are very similar. Again, 3 primary layers and again 2 secondary, but there is really no limit here. You can use as many secondaries as you want till you get the desired result. Of course, you can use many primaries, but I always use 3. Now again, the first one does the basic thing without changing anything, increasing saturation, increasing the contrast. This is what makes the image usable. Then adding a primary. This is again toning down the highlights a little bit, shadows a little bit, and changing the midtones. Primary, giving the sky an orange tint, and shadows are tinted towards blue a little bit. Now I decided to go with extreme secondary corrections here, and I'm not gonna go through what I did here because it's exactly the same thing I did in the last clip, but these are different a little bit. So this changes the sky to a pink, a really interesting look from this dull look, and creates a contrast between the sea, mountain, ships, and the background. Let's try it. A secondary, and choosing this eyedropper tool, dragging it over here, color gray, And as you can see, we selected almost everything here. We didn't select here, and we selected a little bit of these sea and boats. And if we try to select all of this here, we are also going to introduce more in the boats. And even though we did this, we are still not selecting this part, which is not selectable without selecting a lot more. So we have this sea here, these things here, and really this is the reason to use mask. Now, the way I made it pink is simple. I just use gamma to make it a little bit pink. And you can get away with this. But as you can see, look at here. The color of the sea changes, the color of the boats changes, and I just didn't want this. So going back to the way I graded it, I used something called masks in Speedgrade. Now you can start with this, or choosing a preset. Here I choose a preset. This is a basic square, and I'm gonna use it to cover my sky here. Using these tools, I can expand these, and using this, I can feather them. This will make it easy to put it precisely where it needs to be. And using the feather, we can make the transition between these areas a lot better. Now by clicking this one, I make it so these don't get affected. Of course, this place of the ship gets affected a little bit still, but this is something I can deal with, or leave it and most people won't recognize it. But the sea color should be blue. Now, this mask is good, but it's not following the shot, so it will be here in this shot. Speedgrade has a built-in tracker that you can use, but the problem with it only tracks forwards. So it's something that can't track backwards. You have to use keyframes manually to follow this throughout the shot. So going to my shot again, I can use these tools to make it follow. And I use auto, go a few seconds back, and just move this up. It doesn't have to be perfect. You go a little more, let's move it up. So it follows my shot, but it ends in the wrong place because I didn't add a keyframe here. So I go ahead and drag it below, still with auto turned on. So it follows my shot pretty good, and with that amount of feathering, people probably won't notice that it's not perfect. Of course, you can always go slower and follow your shot better, but this makes it possible to change only the sky. Now the second one is a very drastic one as well. This changes the color of the sea, and you can see it makes them a more clear blue. And if you're, as an example, don't want these to get affected, you can always draw a mask and select outside of that mask. So when I go here to these mountains, or here, these areas won't get affected, and just making it bigger, feathering it, and keyframing it through the shot. Now I'm just going to be going through some of my shots to show you what I did, but very fast, because it's the exact same technique in every shot. Primary, another primary that fixes the contrast, as you can see here in highlights. Another one, which I use mainly to make these more blue and make these more red or brown. A secondary dedicated for the sea to make it more blue. A secondary dedicated to these sands to make them saturated and more brown. Again, going here, one primary fixes the exposure, contrast, and saturation. Another creates contrast in highlights, midtones, and shadows. Another one grades it. This is a little more pronounced grades. So you can look here. It was warm, now it's cold. Clouds are white, and now it's a little bit warm there. And midtones here in the background, you can clearly see they are changed. And a secondary to change the look of sky and the sea. And this works in skin tones as well. There are no secondaries here. If I don't need, I don't use. Primary, exposure, and saturation, and contrast. I normally don't do this way, but in the second one, I decided that it really needs to fix the skin tones. And the third one, I improved the skin tones a little bit. So this one was an exception, and there are always exceptions to the rules. And I'm just giving you the way I grade these, and I hope this video will enable you to grade your footages a little more creatively and understand both the limitations and the capabilities of working with raw and log files. Again, a shot that I really like, I'm just using 0 and without 0, and this is again the same thing. And you can copy the grades just by using Command C, Command V, and one by one you can see the grade coming to life. You can change many things, and this is the final shot. Fix the exposure, fix the contrast, colors, then work with the colors that you want separately. Thanks for watching.